the impact of Apple sort of exporting its technology transfer or exporting its technology and it being sort of imbibed by the Chinese, the effect is the Chinification of the smartphone industry. This is not a story about globalization. It's very much a story about Chinification.
Yeah, and does Apple not anticipate that's what's going to happen? Is that Beijing's plan all along? I mean, this is not a industry specific phenomenon, right? I mean, like, you teach a given country and its workers how to build something, they will try and cost cut you out of the picture, build alternatives, competitors. So is Apple not anticipating that one? And is that the unintended consequences of Apple strategy, or is this something they anticipate and they say it's okay, we don't care?
Yeah, so there's a couple different answers here. So one is that during this stage, Apple has, I think you could rightly call it a certain arrogance or hubris, that they notice that people are copying them. Of course, they do go after Samsung and sue them on multiple continents and
Yeah.
eventually win, I think, around $1 billion, which is pretty inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. And, there's a famous quote from Johnny Ive speaking, I think, in 2013 at a Vanity Fair conference where he's asked about Xiaomi's likeness to to iPhones rather. And he basically says, like, it's brazen theft and I don't like it. It's not okay. But those kind of outbursts really diminish with time. And I would suggest maybe two reasons. There's multiple, but let's just stick with two. One is that the arrogance I'm speaking of is that Apple thought we're innovating so much that if the companies are copying what we have shipped, they'll always be one step behind because what they're not copying is what we are about to ship. And in the world of smartphones, not so dissimilar from the world of fast fashion, if you've got a lead on your competitors of 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, that's enough for you to outsell everybody else in the premium sector, and then you move on to the next thing. The
Yeah.
problem, if we're fast forwarding, is that smartphones aren't really being revolutionized the way that they were in the first, let's say, decade of the iPhone. Right? We've sort of come to a point where a 6-inch glowing
Right.
rectangle in
It's
your pocket is
incremental
pretty
now. Right.
perfect. They're all pretty similar now.
Yeah.
So Apple's trying to do things. There's a new button, right? I mean, this is pretty small bore stuff. Now it's in titanium. Okay, I guess that takes some weight off of it.
Yeah.
They try to do colors, which is pretty inconsequential. Is the first thing that people do is buy a case for it. There's just not a whole lot they can do. It's not going to be a triangle next year just because it can. That doesn't make any sense, right? So there's a sense in which they just think they're going to take the lead on design and keep up. And I think that logic sort of hits an end as early as 2019, let's say. And
Yeah.
I've got sort of the court documents to back up some of the internal panic within Apple once the Chinese are very much outmaneuvering them and getting ahead of them in certain ways. The other one is political, which is that to say that when Xi Jinping comes into power, he has a bunch of reasons to think that Apple is this exploitative company, akin to the paradigm of the Dutch and East Indian trading companies that caused China's century of humiliation. And Apple begins to worry that it's going to be blacklisted from the country. Facebook, Google, other companies are blacklisted in the country, so that's not an idle threat per se. And Apple basically has to learn how to play politics. They have to learn the game of incentivizing and working with, not just Beijing, which is really their focus beforehand, but also the local cadres, the local mayors. Apple's understanding of Chinese politics was terrible before 2013. They really didn't know anything. They had just relied on people like Foxconn, which was brilliant at understanding politics, to do everything. And after Xi Jinping comes into power and Apple feels threatened, it's the first time in their sort of 20-year at the time existence in China that they really hire senior people. I mean, they have at least 2 vice presidents living in the country after 2014 for the first time ever. I mean, you have to remember Steve Jobs, who died in 2011, never set foot in China once. Right.
It's
So
crazy, right? I mean, I think that
it is crazy. And, so something like when Walter Isaacson writes his biography of Steve Jobs, I mean, China is mentioned in the index 3 times and never for a consequential reason. But
yeah.
that's not a knock against Walter. I mean, if you're writing a history of Apple in 2011, to miss China would probably be a big misstep. But for a biography of Steve Jobs, I mean, China is not part of his worldview. It's not part. It's just where things get built, and that's more of a Tim Cook story than it is a Steve Jobs story. So anyway, so my point is that when Xi Jinping comes in and Apple feels threatened, they need to sort of demonstrate the technology transfer. In other words, it goes from this liability that things get copied when we build here to hey, look at how much Chinese companies are learning from us. In other words, they totally flip something on its head from being a liability to being a political asset, because they can show, hey, look, the investments we are making are resulting in Huawei, Xiaomi, Vivo, these companies really taking power in the most iconic product of the 21st century, which is undoubtedly the smartphone. So they're able to, do that jujitsu trick of taking something that had actually been sort of anathema to them and realize the political power that it had, which would allow them to remove obstacles within China and sort of ingratiate themselves with the political leadership from the local cadres in Shenzhen all the way up to the highest echelons of power in Beijing.